Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Down Syndrome Center podcast. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Kishore Velody. Today, we have a podcast that's going to be talking about a concept that actually I'm excited to learn about because it's going to be somewhat new to me, some of the things that are being studied, and excited to be able to learn from our speakers today about central neural drive and how that really impacts our friends with Down syndrome and how we can maybe study this further. But before I get too far into the podcast, I'd like to introduce our speakers. One of our speakers is a return guest to the podcast, Helen Milligan, and Dr. Jay Nair is also joining us as well. Helen, why don't we start with you? Tell us who you are, what you do, and what makes you love working with this population.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for inviting us to the podcast today. We're really excited. I am an assistant professor in the physical therapy department at Thomas Jefferson University, and I'm as well a clinician at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia in their Trisomy 21 program. I've been there for over 20 years. And I've also worked in early intervention for about 20 years. So that's another passion of mine. Um, I'm a Special Olympics coach, and I'm currently coaching young athletes with our Doctor of Physical Therapy students. But I think the most important fun fact about me is that I am a mother of three children, and my youngest son, Aiden, who is 23-year-old adult who has Down syndrome, and he's pretty much been the impetus for all that I do here professionally, and also overflowing into my personal work.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Helen. I really appreciate you joining us on the podcast. And Jay, I'll call you Jay during the podcast or
Yeah,
Dr. Nair,
absolutely.
whatever you'd prefer.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
tell us more about who you are and what you do and why you like working with this population.
Yeah. First of all, thanks for inviting me over this podcast. This is a great honor, a privilege, and I couldn't be more appreciative about it. So also a physical therapist by training, and I have interest in control of breathing, and primarily thus far, before I delved into Down syndrome, I worked on primarily on spinal cord injury rehab and a little bit in ALS. But Down syndrome is new, and it's primarily because of my hallway interaction with Helen, who we were just throwing off ideas with each other about what I work on and some of the common elements that she find in some of the neurological population that we see here in my lab, and then Down syndrome. And then one thing led to another, and that led to this project right now. So, I couldn't be more excited about being a part of this community. Down syndrome, working with children with Down syndrome is very exciting. I mean, they are the most loveliest people I've worked with. So and the fact that nobody is actively looking at control of breathing in this population. It's kind of alarming and kind of sad that this problem that we're seeing. I thought people were looking at it from. It should be looked at it from for many years from and not like we should not be the first people to look at it because I'm just new into this area. So, but I was surprised, taken quite a bit by surprise that this has not been studied at all. And I felt
Yeah.
that it's a prime time. We need to get in, solve these issues so that we can potentially unlock a lot of therapeutic options out there. So yeah, I
Yes.
couldn't be more excited about being involved in this with this population.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, Helen, thank you for recruiting Jay into the club. I mean, I feel like those of us who have family members or scientific interests in this field, we love drawing others into this work. And as you've discovered, Jay, there are so many holes in our knowledge of understanding of so many things in Down syndrome that I'm really appreciative of the fact that you discovered that there is certainly a need here. So I guess I'll start off with what is this concept? What is central neural drive in breathing? What does it mean? And kind of explain it to us, those of us who are not medical in the audience. Who would like to start with that? Jay, would you want to kick us off, or Helen?
Yeah, I could take a shot.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
most of the people think about breathing being like inspire and expire. So just take in air and take out air, and that's it. It's just a pump. It works indefinitely from birth to death, and it just happens automatically in the background while you're doing and living your life. But what happens is for this to happen, you need the input from the brain, and that input from the brain has to be relayed to the spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord to the muscle, the inspiratory or expiratory muscles, which actually drives the pump. and that pump is needed to create the negative pressure in your airway, and through which the lungs get in, gets the air in, and then that's where the air exchange takes place, which performs the vital function of respiration. So it's a very complex process. Even though at the end of it, it looks like inspiration, expiration, but a lot goes behind the scene, and primarily it takes place in the brain and the brainstem. So it's not only respiratory mechanics that is involved, but there's a lot of neural drive that actually is behind the scene, which actually drives this movement. So I think it's underappreciated. I mean, it's known for quite some time, and there's quite a bit of literature on breathing impairments in Down syndrome. I mean, most of the children with Down syndrome, or even adults with Down syndrome, they usually end up staying longer in the hospital, and that's usually because of some sort of respiratory complications.
Hmm.
And it's also well known that they have higher amount of upper airway inflammation. They have more collapsible upper airway, which makes them susceptible to sleep apnea.
Hmm.
They have like a facial structural issues, which actually also predispose them to sleep apnea. But what is I think what we are discovering is that on top of these structural issues that they have, we call that effector problem. That means the end organ, the muscle that is driving the movement of breathing problem. In addition to that, there is a problem of the drive. So imagine if this system is compromised, and you would expect a compensatory overdrive from the brain to these muscles to compensate for these weaknesses. Well, what we are discovering is that the input from the brain or brainstem to the spinal cord and then to the muscle is actually reduced. We can go into the details what we found, but
Hmm.
I think that's what we are finding in this
Yeah,
population.
I mean, we've definitely done several podcasts on obstructive sleep apnea before, and it's such a common hot topic that we touch on. But you're absolutely right. We don't really talk about the central drive to breathe. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast who haven't gone to any kind of professional training, medical school, or anything of that nature, you may not realize just how complicated the whole process is. We just take a breath in and we think, oh, not a big deal. But from the brain all the way down to the muscles, so many things had to be coordinated. So, Jay, thanks for highlighting that for us. Helen, anything that you would want to add in terms of what we were just talking about, central neural drive to breathe?
No, I mean, I think what Jay was mentioning is what we experience and what we see as well as a parent who has a son who has Down syndrome, who has compromised respiratory status like his entire life. He had a tracheal esophageal fistula that was repaired when he was born and has always had, he's multiple pneumonias. He has sleep apnea. He now has the hypoglossal nerve stimulator, and breathing, sleep, all of this has been impacted. And I always thought and watched him breathe and noticed, there has to be something else other than just this mechanical piece. So it's kind of like the controller of breathing.
Yeah.
And we started with our pilot study last year. When I mentioned this to Jay, he was willing in an open mind and said, this has to have been studied. And said, I really don't think so. I've looked in the literature, and he did as well. And he said, I think people just think people with Down syndrome might not be able to cooperate with like completing what needs to be completed in the study. And what we found, and what Jay now is like, this is one of his favorite populations now to work with, is that our
Yeah.
participants who came in with Down syndrome, I made a visual schedule and they were able to follow, and were very excited about being a part of our research and follow the directions. And now I think we're coming up with some very interesting findings after our pilot study. So I'll let Jay kind of.
Yeah. Let's go into that a little bit. So tell us a little bit about how this concept of central neural drive, specifically how it impacts people with Down syndrome, what you've been studying. Yeah, give us some ideas of what's been going on.
Yeah, so I think I mean, it'll be, uh, I may be sounding too naive, but I feel like the clinical testing for breathing is still like, airplane mode. Like, when you say an airplane, I'm saying like the invention as far as aircraft is concerned is stuck in 60s. All the innovation happened in 60s, and then, we're still using the same aircraft for like, passenger movement and all those things. So same way, I think pulmonary function test is the only way we are assessing breathing. but breathing, that only covers one aspect of the whole neuro axis that controls breathing. So when we ask someone to perform a breathing test, you are expecting them to volitionally contract these muscles or move these muscles based on their command, which is primarily driven from the cortex. But for 90% of the time, the breathing takes place unconsciously from the brainstem down to the spinal cord. And that part is not really well assessed in the clinic. And that's what we are honing in right now. And trying to, that's where we're finding some of these new, discoveries that we think that is being neglected in this community. The It's true that these children have problems in compliance. Like when you ask them to do pulmonary function tests, it's complicated for anyone. Like if me and you or anyone does, it takes several times to actually get it right. But with children with Down syndrome, it makes it extremely difficult to get these tests administered. And some of the literature highlights that points that some of the time these measures that we see with pulmonary function tests are lower because they are not able to comply with the test requirements. So what we have done is we gamified a lot of things. Like Helen mentioned, she has her expertise in pediatric physical therapy, so she used her skill set, and we have some therapists in the lab who actually helps with gamifying this test. But in spite of our best effort, we still find that it's difficult to get a truly valid, reproducible response, which is usually less, and it's suppressed compared to control. So we can discount it that it could be that the test itself is harder for this in population, and that's why the results are poorer. But we also do to test the automatic part of breathing, which is like how the brainstem is controlling, which is outside the volitional control of these individuals. So what we do is we get them wear a mask, and in the mask they get the air from one side, and the air goes out to the other side. So inspiration from left and expiration from the right. So they don't rebreathe the same air. But what we can do is when they are breathing in air, that pipe, if you occlude, that creates a negative pressure at the mouth. And that negative pressure is a good indicator of how much brainstem drive to spinal cord and to the muscle is. Now, of course, I can't say that it's only brainstem, but because anything below brainstem, it'll be covering up. So it could be anywhere from airways to muscles to everything. But the fact that it is free of volitional control, you can pick up the other domain, which is usually left off. And what we saw is that, and this test is known as a mouth occlusion pressure, or P.1. So using this mouth occlusion pressure, what we found is that most of the children we saw with Down syndrome, they have a lower ability to generate that negative pressure when their airway is occluded, suggesting that they may be having an impaired or reduced brainstem drive to breathe. So that's one thing we are observing. And this is on top of the fact that they have tracheomalacia, they have a smaller airways, almost half of the size of general control population. So in spite of having a narrow airway, where even if they have the same drive, the pressure should be higher or more negative, we are seeing a lesser pressure generation, suggesting that in fact truly the drive is reduced. So it's suggesting that the neural drive is definitely compromised in this population. The other thing that we test,
if I could just, Dr. Nair, I just want to make sure that so what you're saying is, so the testing that you're doing is showing that when people with Down syndrome are not actively breathing on their own, like we can tell ourselves take a breath in or or push a breath out, we can actively tell us. Your test is actually looking at even those times where we're not actively telling ourselves to breathe. Thankfully, we continue to breathe because the brain continues to send that signal. And what you're discovering, you're saying, is that the signal that is coming from the brain in people with Down syndrome is not as strong as you would expect.
Correct. In spite of having, in spite of having a thinner, a smaller diameter or smaller area of airways, where the pressure is, if the pipe is less, like when you use a hose, when you press the hose, the pressure increases. So same way, just because the airway is small, the pressure should be automatically higher if the drive is normal. But the fact that we are seeing a lower drive on top of a thinner upper airway suggests that the drive is probably really, really low in this population.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, the other thing that we're seeing is the afferent part, the sensory part. That means, whenever you breathe, you're trying to control for carbon dioxide. So when you eat food, you digest the food, and that food is converted into water vapor and carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide is what need to be removed from the system. That's the primary job of the breathing muscles, to get rid of this extra CO2 that's generated. So there are centers in the brainstem that actually detects that elevation or decrease in CO2. So what we are finding is, so we are testing that too. So what we do is we have a bag filled with air that contains low oxygen and high carbon dioxide to challenge the nervous system to see how quickly the nervous system reacts to the change in oxygen and carbon dioxide, and then responds by increasing the volume of air you breathe in and out, either by increasing frequency or the depth of breathing. And what we found is that some of these kids may be underperforming, or some of the kids may be actually overreactive to that chemical stimuli. That means when we give the hypoxic air or high carbon dioxide air for a small period, like 1 minute, 1.5 minute, we see a greater increase in their respiratory output. In some animal studies, they showed that it has actually decreased. And I think this has been there is some literature back in 2009 in animal model that suggests that they have something known as Down syndrome cell adhesive molecules, which actually helps connect synapses on target. So when you have higher expression of these things, which is what is present in Down syndrome, they tend to make poorer connections. And if you have those connections, poorer connections, the connection between the part of the brain that actually causes the breathing movement, and the part that actually sends those decreased oxygen and high carbon dioxide, the connections could be also impaired, which could mean that they may be either less or more sensitive to the amount of carbon dioxide or oxygen in the air. So another thing that is like not commonly tested in the clinic, but we're finding that there could be abnormalities associated with that chemosensitivity. That
So
is
just
afferent part of breathing.
just to help me understand that too. So you're saying I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong, but tell me, if I'm breathing a high level of carbon dioxide, my body should want to breathe that out faster
Right.
because well, I don't want to keep carbon dioxide in my system. But what you're seeing in people with Down syndrome is both. They sometimes will breathe fast, but sometimes they won't. Or is there
Yeah.
a reason for why sometimes and not others?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think the animal study shows that the connections could be poorer, and therefore they may have a hypo response to increased CO2. But what we're
Mhm.
seeing is that some of the kids may have like latent or occult sleep apnea.
I see.
Yeah, so because of sleep apnea, they may be like undiagnosed sleep apnea, which may be priming their nervous system to high CO2, so they're more sensitized to that. So
Got it.
the system has seen this happen before, and they respond vigorously to avoid that. So they're kind of like a heightened response, like a sort of like a hyper-reactive stimulus,
Okay.
hyper-reactive response to the changes in the gases in the air.
Okay. Okay. That helps. Okay. Great.
Yeah. Yeah, and also we also do something known as transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is a non-invasive way of stimulating the cortex to see how the connection from brain to the diaphragm muscle is. That from brain to spinal cord, and then from there to the diaphragm or the inspiratory muscle. So what we are finding is that it takes a lot more like current input to actually get a evoked response in these children, suggesting that the nervous system could be like more suppressed. That the drive could be much more suppressed, so it takes much more current to actually elicit a response comparable to what we see in control children. So all of these things, based on all these findings, it looks like they may be having a suppressed neural drive. That means that the signal from the brain to the spinal cord and to the muscle could be compromised, which in the event of disease or any sort of infection
Hmm.
could be taking a far worse hit, resulting in much worse outcome in these children compared to controls.
And that's exactly what I was wondering. And I was thinking about how so much of what we see and so many podcasts that we've done in the past is like just how long it takes for people with Down syndrome to recover from a respiratory illness. And there's so many reasons for it. But I wonder too, as you're describing the central neural drive, if that might be playing a role in the prolonged nature of so many different respiratory illnesses. I don't know. Is that something that you have been looking at in terms of strategies to help with this neural drive and how we might be able to help people with Down syndrome?
Yeah, that's precisely our goal. So that's the next phase of our study. Hopefully, we'll get there soon. And our goal is that we are on the sideline. I'm working on spinal cord injury, developing therapies that we use to increase neural drive in individuals with spinal cord injury. So we can use similar strategies to actually, once we establish that this neural drive does exist, we are doing like imaging also. So we didn't talk about imaging, but we also do imaging to actually see what centers are affected in the brainstem. And if we Once we establish that, the next strategy would be to increase the neural drive using non-pharmacological as well as pharmacological intervention to support, their recovery or enhance their breathing output. So one thing that we can think of is, to improve breathing response is just use inspirator resistance training. That's like classic rehab, where we focus on breathing muscles, do resistor training for the diaphragm and the inspiratory muscles and expiratory muscles, and then that could actually drive. Because the nervous system, the muscle is getting stronger. The feedback goes into the nervous system. Because of the feedback, the nervous system becomes stronger, so the neural drive can increase. But this is a traditional approach. The other thing is to actually use electrical stimulation. So we can use transcutaneous spinal stimulation, which is you putting sticker electrodes on the back of the neck and then stimulate the spinal cord non-invasively, and then make the afferent inputs, the sensory input that's coming from this exercising muscle, to amplify the signal. So when you put electrical stimulation on the back of the neck, it actually amplifies whatever signal is generated at the muscle level, and that amplified input goes into the brain. So it's kind of like using a loudspeaker to tell the brain, hey, start responding more vigorously. So that's like our way of telling the nervous system to work harder. And then we can also use hypoxia, hypercapnic hypoxia, which if at a lower dose, that is intermittent hypercapnic hypoxia or just hypoxia alone, has been shown to be a primer for neuroplasticity and has been used in stroke, spinal cord injury, and other population. But we can use that same strategy to actually drive the descending brainstem down to the spinal cord, that supraspinal drive, to actually increase the signal from the brain to the spinal cord and enhance the breathing output. So these are non-invasive approaches. Then we have newer drugs that are out there like ampakines, which actually are like they actually open these ion channels that are associated with the neuronal excitability. You can just extend the time of their discharge time, and therefore you can get more activation of the muscles and the nerves for any given input from the brain. So that's another way we can actually increase the neural drive and then result in an optimized breathing output in these populations. Those are some of the strategies we're thinking of.
Yeah, yeah. Helen, I want to give you a chance too to share a little bit about your thoughts and Jay, I appreciate. I mean, there's so much that as you're thinking about the central neural drive. Helen, I was wondering if you might help us as we're trying to think more about the studies that are going on and also kind of how you might translate some of these things to a parent who's listening to the podcast as well.
Right. Well, first of all, I just am so grateful to Jay
Yeah.
for taking this on and being such a pioneer looking at this, because I think we are going to learn a lot about, breathing and people with Down syndrome. And I think that the fact that we can actually make an impact or make a change, I think is very exciting for the future, because I think breathing is impaired in everybody with Down syndrome. And also, maybe some of the non-invasive, just even focusing on breathing when the child's younger and focusing on, helping that child be a more efficient breather, and just being aware of this is might make a little bit of a difference as well. Just I know there's a lot. My first job was as a physical therapist out at Rancho Los Amigos Medical Center, working with people with spinal cord injury. So we focus on breathing a lot, and a lot of these techniques that Jay is talking about, they're implementing the treatments in people with spinal cord injury, and they're making improvements, big improvements in their breathing. And I think that's where the future, because we are finding differences. So it is exciting to be a part of this research. I just feel so grateful and blessed to be here at Jefferson and that we are looking at this. And I think a lot of other people might start looking at it as well, and we could come up with some innovative treatments in the near future, actually.
That's great. So maybe one of you can just share a little bit in terms of our podcast listeners. Some of them may be interested in trying to contribute to the science that's happening and the improvement, not only just for their loved one with Down syndrome, but for people to come. So how could they get involved with what you're all doing?
Helen, you want to take?
Oh, sure. So we're currently recruiting participants with Down syndrome, as well as our control participants here at Jefferson. So we've broken the study up into 2 days. And the first day, we're looking more at the breathing and the breathing mechanicals, the chemosensitivity, And then the second day, we're doing imaging, an MRI, looking at the spinal cord in the brain. So we've broken it up just to help with compliance, but it is possible to do the study also in one day. So we're here in Philadelphia in Center City, on the Jefferson Center City campus, doing this research. And I can certainly forward the information. You would email us, and we have a study coordinator, Dana Johnsn, who would be in touch with you to set up arrangements so that you could participate in the study. It's Nair, what is it, Jay? Nair Lab
At jefferson.edu.
.edu.
Okay. And would this be for people who are local, or is there funding for families who need to travel? How would that work?
Yeah, I think we have funding, some amount of funding to actually help with like travel costs, and since it's just one day of stay, we can also potentially pay some participant if they want to stay overnight at Philadelphia Center City near our campus. So we do have that provision. We have budgeted it, but I think we are more open to local population, and then if we find difficulty in recruiting the number of subjects that we require to complete the study, then we open it for other people outside the city.
Great. So I will definitely include the contact information and study information in the show notes, whatever you send my way, and that will be there. Before we close the podcast today, is there anything else we wanted to make sure that we talked about on this topic, or any other summary or resources you want to make sure you share today?
I just want to say that breathing is central for everything. So if kids are not able to play, it could be because they are just having dyspnea. I mean, they have breathing difficulty, and that could prevent them from participating in sports. There's also some literature that suggests that if breathing is impaired during sleep, it affects cognition. So some of the cognitive aspect could be explained by poor sleep, like sleep disorder breathing, or just what do you call that? Just higher carbon dioxide in the blood, because they're not just responding to that the higher carbon dioxide in the blood, and that could be a cause for more neuroinflammation and more cognitive issues that rise from that. So there are so many things that are interlinked, because breathing is such a fundamental aspect of life, and it touches everything. Anxiety could be one more thing, that if you're not breathing enough, it can lead to some anxiety issues. And of course, I've not seen any of our kids, they're so sweet, but I mean, there could be autism related issues that could be driven by the breathing issues. There are so many things that are it seems unrelated, but could be tackled from this central node called breathing. So if we tackle breathing effectively from all different directions, that we can have a handle on it, I think we may have a better solution to the quality of life issues that we deal with.
That's great. Thanks. Helen, anything you want to make sure you leave us with on the podcast?
Just one practical thing for me, now that I've been a part of this research, and I'm aware that maybe my son Aiden isn't aware of when he maybe needs his rescue inhaler. So relying on that person to feel that need, that they may not be aware of the fact that he might need to use his inhaler, or maybe we could be more preventative. So before he's exercising, I'm having him use it more now. Just these little practical tips, just from being a part of this research and being aware of it, I think is important.
That's great.
Thank you so much for having us today.
Oh my goodness. Thank you both for joining me on the podcast and sharing this really amazing, interesting topic. And I will definitely look forward to seeing the outcomes of this research. It's really exciting. And so to our listeners, I want to make sure I give you guys an opportunity to know any topics that we talk about here on the podcast. Many of them actually come from you. So you can send us an email at downsyndromecenter@chp.edu, and we'd be glad to find speakers who can help answer the topics that you bring up. And if you're interested in being a part of what we do here at the center, including this podcast, you can go to givetochildrens.org/Down Syndrome Center. But until next time, bye-bye.